and welcome to another Unity 5 tutorial. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create a mini-map, like the type that you see in GTA and many other games. And this mini-map is going to appear down in the bottom corner here, the left hand bottom corner, and it's going to show you a overview of the game world, as well as have icons on it to show you where objects that are in the world are positioned. Now, what I've got here as a starting project is I have imported in the Unity project from an old racing game they had, which was with Unity 3, I think, and it had some games and that in it. So I just wanted a map. I quite like this map. And then I went through and deleted all the scripts and the cars that actually came with it because they don't work in this version of Unity. And then I brought in this little car, which is a free cartoon car from the asset store. Okay, and I've dropped that in there. It doesn't do anything too exciting, and I put a few lights on it just to jazz it up a bit. And all I've done so far is to add a rigid body to the car, and also added a mesh collider to the road because it didn't have one. And then I've also added a drive script. Now, this drive script I've used before. Let's just open up so you can have a look at it, and we'll look at that script a little later. So this is the drive script, and you can find this on the Unity website in the scripting. I've used it in the Dragon tutorial. I've also used it in, I think, the networking tutorial as well. It's just a very useful little script to have your hands on. And when you attach it to anything, it makes it drivable. All right, so I won't go through that now, but you can look at the other tutorials if you're interested. So I've attached that to the car, which means that I can use the arrow keys or the WASD keys to move the car around. I'm not a very good driver. Anyway, it's doing the job that I want. It's going to make its way around the track. Now, to get the camera to follow the car, I have on the main camera added a smooth camera follow script, which I have also used in and explained in a number of other tutorials as well, with the Dragon, and it's also in the Networked Cars Part 2 tutorial. Which makes me think I might actually make some really short, like 1-minute tutorials that just actually show you all these separate little scripts so that you can grab hold of them if you don't want to go back and watch all of the other larger tutorials. Anyway, just for now, without going through this entire script, I'll just bring it up and scroll through it for you if you want to type it in without explaining. So this is our smooth camera follow.cs script. And its origin was that it came with a very old Unity tutorial, which was, I think, with version 2, and it was in JavaScript. So I've updated it to C#. And I just find it fantastic that if you attach it to the camera, and then you set the target up here in the inspector of the thing that you want the camera to follow, it will just follow it around as though it's on some kind of elastic band. Okay, so this is the script. Just pause the video as you're typing this out. You can also grab this script from any of the other downloads on my website in the tutorial section if you want to get your hands on it. So that's the late update function, and then there's just a little bit more. We go down to here, and just the rest of it. Okay, so I hope you got all that. Anyway, that's attached to the camera, which is here, and then it's got a target, and we drag and drop our car object onto that so that the camera will now follow it around. And with this script, you can change the distance that the camera follows and the height as well if you want to move the camera up and down. Right, so let's get started with this actual tutorial. So the idea will be that our car is going to be the center of the map, and as the car moves, the map updates itself. So the map's going to appear down in this bottom corner. The first thing to do is to start working with the UI elements to create our basic shape for our map. So we'll use a panel. Right click in the hierarchy. Make sure you're not selected anything, otherwise it will become a child of that object. Right click, go down to UI, and we're looking for panel, and the panel is there. Okay, this creates a canvas object, which is the element that all of your GUI objects present on top of. And you'll have an event system that also gets created. And the event system handles all the input that goes into your user interface. Now, what I've seen before with some people is that they've decided they didn't like the canvas and they deleted it or whatever, and didn't delete the event system, and then they create another canvas, another canvas, another canvas, other UI objects, and you end up with like 5 event systems, which then get very confused. So just be sure if you do that, that you always delete your event system if you're going to remove all of the UI elements. So get rid of all of this stuff here. Okay, anyway, so we've got this panel. Now over in the scene, we want to go to 2D view, click up here, and let's just zoom out to find where our user interface is. So you can see here, just move this across, that we've got our whole panel, and it actually is filling up our entire camera area for our game. What we're going to do is grab the little blue buttons here to resize that panel, and you can see it in the game view that it's being resized. Now, if you don't have the little blue dots, because sometimes they do disappear, up the top you'll find in these clickable things for orientating the scene, there is one on the end that allows you to turn the little blue buttons on so that you can move your UI objects around. All right, so I'm moving this around. I'm going to put it down here, and I'm happy with the size. Now I'm also just going to drag it and move it up like this as well. Now at this point in time, you might want to set its anchor point and its pivot point. The pivot point's in the center, that's fine. And if you want it to stay stuck down in this bottom left hand corner, you might want to make its anchor point this corner here. So over in the rect transform for this actual panel, if we click on this box, and we can set the anchor point to that bottom corner by selecting there. And notice over in scene that you've now got the anchor point, which is shown by this little flower star thing, is now down there for this particular panel, and it will stay stuck down in that bottom corner when we change the size of our screen. All right, so that's creating the panel. Now we need to get our Minimap onto that panel. Now, nothing makes a Minimap better than the actual map itself. So we're going to cheat a little bit. Actually, I wouldn't even call it cheating. It's just the way of doing this. And create another camera that's looking down on the world, and then put that camera's feed onto this little map. And the camera we will attach to our car so it moves around with it. So over in the hierarchy, let's add a camera. By the way, if you can hear snoring, that's Merlin, my Labrador under the desk, keeping me company. And he tends to fall asleep. So we've created this new camera, which is somewhere in the environment. So let's attach it to the car just to make it a little bit easier to find. Attach it to the car, which is where it's going to be anyway. Let's call it Minimap Cam. And I'm going to set its position to 0, 0, 0, which will actually clamp it to the car. So now if we zoom in on the car, you'll be able to see this camera, which is here. And I'll just move it up. Now, what that camera is looking at, you can see down in here in its preview. And if I just move around a bit, we can see that it's sort of rotated in that direction. So we want to manipulate its rotation. Let's put it 0 in the Y. And it's now looking straight ahead, attached to the car. We want it to be rotated so it's looking directly down on our car. And that's a rotation around the x-axis of -90. Okay, and then we want to move it up. And as we move it up, see what we're getting? We're getting basically getting a mini map. Okay, so we want to move it up, and a very long way up actually, because you want to get a fair bit of your map. So if you want your mini map to look like, you know, maybe that kind of view, depends on how much you want to see. It's up to you, really. So let's leave it up like that. The other thing we're going to do is also make it orthographic so that we're getting a square view of the environment. We don't have this perspective because we don't actually want the perspective in that mini map. And you can see currently that the shape of the camera is a pyramid. So when we go to orthographic view, which is over here in the inspector, it becomes a rectangular prism. Now the size of it, you can see, is quite narrow, and again it restricts this view here. So if we change this size, just drag this up. I think I had about 200 at one point when I was trying this out. Let's type 200 in, see where we go. Yeah, that's not too bad. It might be a little bit too much. 150, might want it like that. You can adjust it later on. Now, because it's orthographic, the distance that you have the camera, besides the fact that the view volume might go through your landscape, will not affect the size of what you see in here as it does with perspective. So we can actually move it up and out of the road like that. Okay, so there's our camera. Now, if you have a look at any camera in Unity, it has this target texture, which allows us to put the feed from the camera onto a texture. So what I'm going to do now is make a target texture to put that feed onto. So in the project, let's go create, and let's go down to render texture, and we get something that looks like this. Let's call it Minimap. Which is here. I think that's it. Yep. Now it's still got some garbage left on it from memory, from when I was playing around with it before. If you're doing this for the first time, I'm not sure what you'll get on here. You'll get some kind of, you might just get nothing, or you'll get some random stuff going on. Right, so let's go back to our camera, and we're going to grab our Minimap render texture and put it into here. So now this texture will have a direct feed from the camera. Right, now one thing I'll just point out while I'm thinking about it is that we now have two cameras in the scene. We've got our main camera, which is following the car, and we've got our Minimap camera. Unity doesn't like to have more than one audio listener in the scene. Now cameras come with an audio listener, so the Minimap camera will have an audio listener. You need to remove that, and then you're ready to put the feed from the camera onto your panel. Now, if we have a look at the panel that we've created attached to the canvas, it's currently got this background source image. Now, that's the default, and it's giving us this white semi-transparent background. We want to get rid of that because we're not going to use it. So let's just go into here and go to none. Okay, now it will still have a color associated with it, and that's fine. What we're interested in though is setting this particular material, and we want the material to have the camera's feed on it, which is this render texture we created before. So we need to create a new material for the Minimap. And onto that material, we then put our render texture. And we can drop that in as the albedo texture, and you'll see it come up here. Now, depending on the effect you want on that, you can then set that to, let's say, unlit texture, so that it's not influenced by any shadows, because you probably don't want those in your Minimap. Right, so now we have our render texture we created, we have our material that we created using that render texture. We now go to our panel, and we take our material that we just created, and we drag and drop that onto the image, and there we go. There's our Minimap. Now if we run this, our Minimap camera is attached to our car. As we move around the environment and turn, that camera does all of the work for us, so we don't have to calculate anything. Now, if you want to replace this image with your own custom image, like maybe a vectorized version of the map, I'll talk about that towards the end of the tutorial and show you how to do it. Right, so that's your Minimap. The next step will be to add icons on the map that show you where certain objects are in the environment. So let's create an object that we want to show up on our mini-map as an icon. Let's zoom in here. What I'm going to do is bring an object in and put it on the map. So I'm going to put it over here on the road. And I grabbed a few icons and different assets from the asset store and also from Icon Archive to use for this. So I've got a trash can. I'm going to put the trash can there, and I'm going to resize it just to make it a little bit more normal size. Oh, it still looks huge. Okay, anyway, I'll just put it there to start with. Now, this trash can is going to become an intelligent object in the fact that it's going to tell the Minimap that it exists and what its display icon is going to be. So I've created some code called make, let me open it up for you, make map object. Okay, so this is it. It's very short code. The map object itself will have an image, and this image is going to be the icon that you want that object to show up as on the minimap. It then has a start function that tells the minimap that it exists, and we're going to write this minimap controller code in a moment. But for this code, we're registering the map object, and we're passing this function the object itself and its image that it has hold of. And then we also have an onDestroy, which will take the object away from the minimap. So if this object at any time disappears from your environment, so for example, if you have like an onCollision that destroys the object, then you don't want it to be there anymore. If you have a pickup item in your map, then of course you don't want it to be anymore. So this will automatically get rid of that object for you. So this code is going to be attached to our trash can. So our trash can's up here. I'm going to grab this make map object script and dump it onto there. Now it's waiting for an icon, which is going to be an image. The image itself needs to go onto the canvas. And in order to create an image, you need to make one in the hierarchy and then make a prefab from it. So to do that, select your canvas and actually select the panel. We'll put it on the panel. Right click UE and select image, and it will create a new image. So there's the image, and that image we're going to put a sprite on it for our icon. Now I've brought some images in from Icon Archive. I've got a little trash can here, and it was, I think it was 24 by 24, maybe it was 16 by 16, I can't remember. Of course I could just look at it, that'd make sense. So let me just dump it onto there for us. Okay, so there it is. Oh, it's 16 by 16, and you can see it showing up on the mini map here. Okay, it's not very clear icon, is it? Anyway, in the panel, we want to actually set your image that you've got to 16 by 16 because that's how big it's going to appear on our map. And that is truly awful, isn't it? You can't even see it. I'm going to get another icon for that. 1 second. Right, so I found a different icon. Let me drag it in. It's a PNG file from Icon Archive. It's a trash can icon, which is 24 by 24. And let me find that image and replace that there. It's really not much better, is it? Okay, but let's just make it size 24 by 24. You'd have to play around with this, obviously, to make something looks a bit more realistic and easier to see. But anyway, let's work with that. It's white, it's clear. Okay, so we've got this image that we've now made into the trash can. Let's call this trash icon. And we want to grab this and make a prefab from it. So drag that down into the project and then delete it from there. And then we go back to our trash can object that we've added into the environment, and we use that icon prefab and we drop it onto our script. Okay, so this trash can and any copies of it, so we could actually make it a prefab itself, will now appear on here once we've finished with the script. So let's just zoom out a little bit and Control D the trash can just to create some other versions of it, and just move them around so we have a few more icons appearing on our map. Let's put one down there as well, and put one over here. And I think it's a different elevation at this point, so if I just zoom out, I might have to bring that trash can up a bit. Okay, so I've got a few spread out around the map, and they will automatically register themselves with the Minimap once we put the code onto it. So the Minimap controller code is in a C# file called Minimap controller. And let's just go to the top of this here. So Minimap controller is with capital M and capital M for map and controller, spelt like that with .cs on the end. Make sure that these, of course, are the same. And the Minimap controller keeps a list of the map objects. So when the map objects register themselves, remember back to the code we attached to the trash cans, it has a function that registers map object, and this is that function that gets run. It registers itself as a game object, and the icon image prefab that it has a hold of, so that we can then instantiate a copy of it for our map to display. And then we also add the map object into our list with this code here. Now, each map object that comes in is made into a little class, which is right up the top here. So we've got this map object class, which keeps a hold of the icon, and it also keeps a hold of who owns that icon. Now, this is important because we need to know the position of the game object that owns that icon. Now, we could set the position in here as an XYZ at the time that we create the icon, but if the game object moves, then they have no control over where it's moving to. We don't know about it anymore. So having hold of the game object itself that is displaying the icon allows us to do all sorts of things. We could even work with its rotation or its scale if that was necessary. So that's why we create a new map object and keep hold of everything in this little construct here. Right, so let's move through the Minimap controller class, which is the next one down here. One thing I'll also mention, if you're using list, the C# construct list, which is essentially an array that sort of looks after itself, and we can easily add and take stuff away from it without a lot of messy code. You'll need to include these extra classes at the top. We're also working with the UI elements as well, so you will need this one as well. Otherwise, you'll get an error. Right, back to the class. So the Minimap controller class itself needs to know about your player, which of course is in the center of the screen because the camera is attached to it. And it also needs to know about the Minimap camera. Okay, this is not the camera following the player. This is the one that's attached to the top looking down. And you'll see why we need that in a moment. So here's our register map object function that I've just spoken about. Following that, we've got the remove map object function, which gets called by any map objects when they get destroyed. So if you remember back to the code we attached to the trash cans, it had an onDestroy function. And that will remove itself from the list of our map objects, which will take its icon off of the map, which is very useful. Okay, so that will get called. And then next we have draw map icons function. And this function loops through all of the objects that are in our list. And for each one of those objects, what it does is it calls a world to viewport point of the position of the owner of that object. Okay, so here's the owner's position. And we're calling world to viewport point on the Minimap camera. Very important. We're not worried about the camera that we're looking at the game through, that we're following the car with. This is the Minimap camera. And essentially what this does is to get hold of our game object's world coordinates and plot them into the viewport. So if we go back to here for a second and I find the Minimap camera, which is this big rectangular prism that you can see here. So imagine this top bit here. This is the screen of this camera. And the game objects that are down on the world here have a world position. And what that world to viewport point does is it grabs hold of the object, so say the trash can, and it projects a ray directly at this camera, and so straight up to here, and grabs this point relative to this little square, this viewport. Now, the viewport's dimensions run from 0, 0 to 1, 1 over here. Okay, so it's always a unit size. It doesn't matter how big the size of the camera itself is, it always will have coordinates 0, 0 and 1, 1 over here. So essentially we're going to find a percentage value of where the world object is hitting this screen, which is going to become really useful for us in a moment. Okay, so let's get back to the code. Okay. Now, once we've got that position of the point, we're then also making the icon a child of the panel so that it will display, because if you don't do that, the icon is sort of in the hierarchy, but it's not inside a canvas attached to anything, so it won't be visible. And then we set the screen pos of that icon Z to 0 so that it's at the front and it will be displayed. And then we use this value, this screen pos that we created, and actually put it as the position. So this is where the setting of the icon's position is happening. Now this draw map icons function runs constantly every update. Okay, so that's all I've got to show you there. So if I save that, and let's go back to the Unity project. This Minimap controller script we want to attach to our panel. This is the panel here that is displaying the map. Let's drag and drop that script. And as you can see here, I've got exposed variables of player position and map camera. So let's grab the player position, which is our car, and the map camera, which is our Minimap cam, which is attached to our car. Let's put that into the camera value there. All right, so we're ready to go. We've got trash cans that will inject themselves into that array, and we've got our Minimap controller that will display them. Let's run it, see what we get. Right, so we're running, we're driving, and we can't see any icons. But if you look closely, there are icons, and they're down in this bottom corner here. So let's just switch to 2D view, and let's see if I can zoom in on them. There they are. They're all on top of each other, pretty much down in this bottom corner of our panel, which is, let me just move this over. So this is our Minimap panel, and they've all sort of plonked themselves down this bottom corner. But if we have a look at their positions, if you just click through these, they're all at slightly different positions. So something has happened correctly, but not exactly the effect that we want. Now, what's happened is what I just explained to you in that code. Let's go back to Minimap. Down here is this world to view port point is going to return a value between 0 and 1, giving us the percentage or the ratio position, of the object in that viewport for the camera. And so therefore it's giving us really, really tiny little values between 0 and 1 for all of our icons. What we need to do now is actually spread them out so that they spread across the map. And to do that, we need to multiply them up using the size of the map that we've created. The size we want to multiply by is going to be the size of our panel. And if you select the canvas and have a look at the panel, it has this rect transform attached to it that has a width and a height. And this is what we want to use to multiply our percentage values by for our X and Y positions of our objects on our mini-map so that they display correctly, which is essentially going to push them out or scale up those coordinates from them bunching down in this bottom corner. So back in the mini-map code, after we've set the transform just before the Z, we're not interested about the Z because we only want it in a X and Y on the screen, okay, not the Z value, which is sort of the depth within the screen. So we can grab hold of the rect transform that is on that panel using this line of code here, and then we can get the width of the rect transform with dot rect dot width and the height as well. So we multiply the X by the width and the Y by the height, and save that. And go back to Unity and run. And you can see that the trash can icons are now on the map, but they're not actually on the right position. I can move around and they're still relatively fine, but if I can show you this trash can here, which you might not be able to see, I'll see if I can size it up for us. So this one here, if I make it bigger so that you can see it on the map, see it there now appearing on the map, make it really huge. Okay, so there's our trash can in the world, and here is its icon. Obviously, there's this offset happening, and you can't see the other trash cans here because they're too small, but the offset for each of them is all the same. And it's not a coincidence of what the value of that offset is. It is actually the distance between the corner of our screen down here and the corner of our map. So for each of these icons that are appearing on our map, we need to offset them by the distance that our mini map is actually offset. So we need to get the position, or I should say the coordinates of this bottom corner of the map and add them to our coordinates of our icons, and that will then put them in the right place. Okay, so for that we need to go back to the code. Now it's quite easy to get the corners of that rect transform because there's a function that does it for us. So just after getting the rect transform, I'm just going to drop in some code here. And by using the get world corners function on the rect transform, we will get an array of 4 vector 3s that represent each of the corners. So the bottom left, the top left, the right top, and the right bottom in that order. Which means that corners 0 is going to be that bottom left-hand corner. So we can add that to our multiplied value. If we go corners 0.x and then put the y down here, 0.y is going to fix that offset. So save that. Let's go back into Unity and run. And we'll now see that our icons are in the right spot. Now, I haven't resized this garbage can again, but maybe I can just to demonstrate. If we can make it big enough, you can see on the map, mini map, where it is there. It's now in the right spot as far as the icon is concerned. All right, so now if we take a little drive around, and if we turn around, we get our icons. Now what's happening is with this icon here, we've got a garbage can right at the edge of the map somewhere on the road, but it's still displaying as part of the mini map, which is not what we want. We want to be able to cut it out so that we can't see it when it's out at that distance. So to do that, we create a mask on our panel. Now the panel itself, which is here, because it has a render texture on it, it won't like it if you try and add a mask onto this in the same way that we did with the radar one. So we need to create another image underneath the panel, attach the panel to it, and then put the mask on that particular item. So with this canvas selected, I'm going to go UE and create another panel. And I'm going to attach our panel, our mini map panel, to that panel. so that it becomes a child of it and therefore is sitting on top of it, that you can see there. While I'm here, I'm going to call this mini map panel, which I should have done before so we weren't going to get confused. And so this is the outside bit. So if I go into 2D view and zoom out, I'll be able to resize this. And of course move it. Now, up here, so when we move it around, oh, it's being so clunky to move. Okay, I'm just making it a little bit bigger. And you'll see the reason why in a moment. And let's go to the panel that we've created for our background. And we're going to add a component, and we're going to look up mask and hit mask. And that will create a mask which will now make sure that anything that is outside of that shape won't be displayed. So we need to attach the Minimap to that so it becomes a child. Now, if you don't want that particular panel to show, you can actually turn it off like that, or have it on. Let's just leave it on so you can see the effect of what's going to happen. So when I run this, okay, we've now got these items here. If I spin the car around, you'll notice that that garbage can that was out in the distance isn't there anymore. Now, as I drive away from this particular can, it's going to go off the map. But see, it hasn't been clipped from the map. It's still within this side here. So if you want the effect like you get in Grand Theft Auto with its Minimap, where these little icons actually sit on top of the Minimap outside and overlap it, then you need to do something like this. And then at this point, if you actually turned off the show mask graphic for that background, then they will tend to be floating just around the outside of there. And then as we move away, it will eventually go outside of that graphic and become invisible. And then if we turn around and drive back towards it, it will come back again up the top, as you can see there. Okay, so that's the masking working really well. Now, the final thing that you might like to do is to make objects that are outside the map actually clamp around the edge of the map so that you know they're there. You don't know exactly where they are, but they're in that particular direction. So let's go back to the code to achieve that. So working with the position of these objects, we're going to clamp it to the corners, the edges of the Minimap itself. And remember, we've got the coordinates of the edges of that map from the corners that we've got up here. So I can use the mathf.clamp function, and we grab our position that we're calculating, and then we clamp it between the left side in the X and the right side in the X. So that the left side in the X is going to be the same as this first bottom corner that we created before, which was the bottom left corner. So that's the same one, corners 0.x. And on the other side, we're going to clamp it on the corner, which would be this corner up here. Okay, so we can use the X position of this corner or this corner as our clamping for this side here. So this is corners 0, 1, so 2 or 3 we can use. So I can use 2, corners 2.x. And so this value will be clamped between those two. And the other one we can do the same with this for the Y. And then we add the Y position at the bottom, which is going to be the same as our one we used for the X. But the one for the Y is going to have to be one of these two corners. Okay, it can't be this one because this has got the same Y. So if we use corner 1, we should have the right Y value. So corners 1. That X should be outside, and that should be dot Y. End the bracket, and let's just expand that out so you can see the whole code. I think it's pretty much in the window. Clamping, and then we've got our position there. All right, so we'll save that. Let's go back into here and run it. And now you can see that the trash can that was way out in the distance is now clamped to the side here. So it's on the map somewhere down here, but it's sprung up to there so that we know that it's in that particular direction. So if we drive away from this one here, let's see what happens to it. Is that when it gets to the edge of the map, it will clamp itself there and stay there, as will all of the others. Now, most of them are directly behind us, so they're all sort of next to each other. But as we move around like this, see how they're clamping themselves to the edge, which is what you want. Right, now, let's assume that you don't want every single possible object that's in your game environment to be sitting around the edge of your map, which you probably don't. So you maybe want any objects that are sort of here to be clamped to the edge. Anything else that's out here, you don't want to know about until you get close enough. So we can set a kind of a distance value that tests where our car is with respect to these items, and then display them as clamped objects or objects on the map if they're within a certain distance. Otherwise, we're just going to ignore them. Right, so going back to the code, we'll test for the distance between the player and the particular object before we decide to draw it. So right at the beginning of this for each function, I want to insert some code, which is these few lines here. Okay, now what they're doing is converting the map object's position into a vector 2 and the player's position into a vector 2. So it's only going to work out the distance between the player and the object horizontally, not vertically. If you want it to be vertical as well, then you will have to make these vector 3s and you can work out the distance. But when you're looking down on a map, you're more interested about how far it is away from you on the horizontal than the vertical. So we're using vector 2s in this case and making them out of the X and Y positions of the player and also of the map object. Then we'll have an if statement with a vector2.distance function that tests the distance between the map object's position and the player's position. And if it's greater than 200 distance away, then we're going to disable the icon for the map object and then run a continue. And if you're not familiar with continue, what it does is to skip out of the rest of this for each and come back and start it again. So it'll skip over all of this code. Now, if your object is within 200, then you want to enable the icon just in case you disabled it previously. Otherwise, it won't appear again. Right, so let's save that. And let's go back to the code and see what the effect that it has. Now, while I'm here, I'm actually going to turn that other panel off so it's a bit neater around the edge. So let's run it. Okay, now I'm going to drive away from this one. So let's watch what happens when it gets to the edge. It'll get to the edge of the map. Then it will clamp itself there. So if we're here, it can move around like that. And it's clamping itself. Okay, then if I just keep driving away from it, it'll eventually disappear because we'll be beyond 200. So there we go. It just disappeared then. Now if I turn around and drive back towards it and I get close enough, it will reappear on the edge of the map. And then as I drive up and it gets away from the edge, it will appear on the road and start moving with its normal coordinates on the road for us. All right, now something else you might consider doing is that the car itself is right in the center of this map, and although I can just make it out because it's kind of orange, you might not be able to see it. So you could add something else onto your panel, attach it to the mini map itself, create another image, UE image. And on that image, we will put a car icon, which I've downloaded previously. Just dump that in there. Okay, which is enormous. And I think this was 16 by 16 as well, so I'll just change the size of it. I'm starting to think 16 by 16 is too small a choice for these objects. Anyway, now when we drive, we can actually see exactly where the car is with respect to the other objects in the game, because the icon is more obvious, even though we know it's in the middle of that mini map. Okay, and now that all of this is functioning, we can actually add more objects to our map with different icons. So let's go just into this view here, and let's add some more items into our map. So I've got some other objects that I got was a traffic cone. I'll put the traffic cone there and just zoom in on it and lift it up a bit. Move it over there. So the traffic cone now has to become a make map object. So we drag that onto it. The traffic cone needs an image, right? So the step is to click on our Minimap panel. Now this image is our car icon, so I might just call that car icon while I'm here. I'm so slack at naming things. Let's add another image. This image is going to be our traffic cone icon. Now, I think I have one. There it is there. And let me put that sprite onto there so we can see it. And it's also a little 16 by 16 image. Okay, so there's our traffic cone. Let's name it traffic cone icon. And then we make that into a prefab. Then we find our traffic cone that we created up here, and we grab the prefab icon and set it for the image. So that will now be used by the panel every time it creates or instantiates a new icon. Go back to our Minimap and make sure we remove that icon that we were using before. Okay, so now we have a traffic cone object with everything attached to it to make it appear on our map. So we can then duplicate that and move them around the map like that. And then when we run, we will have the traffic icons show up as well on our map. Oh, there's a garbage can floating in the air. Anyway, you get the idea. So this is the same step for just adding more and more and more. And you could put like an on collision if you want to run into this and make it disappear. And it would automatically, once you've destroyed it with your own code, remove it from the map itself because it's got the code there ready for it. Right. One more very final thing before I finish was that I mentioned earlier that you could also have a different kind of map if you don't want to use the real world. Now we've already got this fantastic Minimap camera doing all of the work for us, which is sitting up here in this rectangular prism. So I've created a Minimap plane, and the way I did that was to take a screenshot of this, take it into Photoshop and draw my map. Then what I'd need to do is bring a plane back into here with that new map on it. Okay, so I need to create a new game object outside of everything else, and I'll make a 3D object plane. And that plane needs to be quite large because it needs to be exactly the same size as the map. And you also need to position it in the same position as your map. Probably not particularly accurate at this point, but you get the idea. Now, because this plane is sitting above the environment, you can see that the camera is picking it up and it's filling up that full view of the mini map. Now, the image I created in Photoshop is just down here, so I'll just dump that onto this thing, and that will create a new material for us using that texture. Okay, there it is. Now, if I just swivel around to check, it's probably not orientated correctly. Okay, so it needs to be rotated around the Y by 180, I think. So let's rotate it by 180. Okay, so now this map is aligned with this street down here. And if we just zoom out far enough, you can see it's not perfect size, and we might need to just make it a bit bigger. And move it across. Okay, and you're starting to see it appearing here. To ensure that this plane is the only thing being rendered by this camera, because at this point if we press play, the map, the 3D world, and the plane that we've just added seem to be interfering with each other. And because we've now got this image that we want to use instead, the camera only needs to be able to see that image. So we grab that plane and we're going to put it into a layer. Now I've already made a mini map layer, so you want to create a new layer that's called Minimap and put it into that mini map layer. Then you want to click on your Minimap cam, and in its culling mask, you want to cull nothing and then set it back to Minimap so it picks up that mini map. All right, so let's just rotate this scene around. Now, remember before that we put our camera, Minimap camera, up really high, and because it's orthographic, it's not going to affect it. And this plane here, you don't really want to see when you're down driving around in here. Now, if you look up from your scene from below, you're looking through that plane and you won't see it anyway. So it's not going to be a problem. But you do want to ensure that the image that you're using is low enough that as the camera moves, it's not going to cull it by accident. So if I just, as you can see here, it's very close to that near plane of the camera. We probably just need to move it down a little bit so that it's still going to have plenty of room for that camera to rotate and move and change its height as the car does. Okay, so let's run this. And provided we've aligned our fake map well over the top of our real terrain, as we drive along, we should be following the correct road and picking up all of the objects that are on there as well. Okay, it seems to be working nicely. It's not the prettiest map. I just quickly dodged that up in Photoshop just to illustrate what's happening. So yeah, you can pretty much use the actual terrain. Oh, I'm not watching where I'm driving. That was clever. Don't know if my car can fix itself. Whoops. So actually, this shows you a really good point of what's happening. The camera is on top of our object, and now it's actually, because our object has been flipped, it's caused an issue where it's not looking down on our object anymore, which is going to be a problem if you want to flip your object around in your environment. So we actually need to modify the Minimap cam a little bit to keep it above the object, but to not be actually attached to it in a way that it will modify with the rotations of the car. So I've put together a quick little script called follow player cam, and inside it all we need to do is set the position of our camera to be aligned with the X position of the player and the Z position of the player. And we want to keep the camera at the same distance that it's already in at the Y. So we give it back its own Y position. And that means that this code, all it has in it is pretty much that. Just setting the position of the camera. So we'll save that and move back to here. Now the camera that's attached to the car, we now want to unattach it. So we'll move it up and just put it there so it's its own agent. It won't have moved in the environment at all. Okay, so it's still actually sitting directly above the car, which is where we want it, and it will stay at that same height. So let's put the follow player cam code onto it and give it the car as the object that it's going to follow. So now it's going to act like it did before, following the car around, but when the car accidentally flips, it's not going to be affected. So I'll see if I can flip my car around. Oh, there we go. So notice now that that camera is nice and stable. It's not worried about the orientation of the car, which is a much better way to go. So there you go. Lucky I flipped my car at that point, or we would have had a problem later on. Right, so that's creating a mini map, and you can keep adding as many different items with their own icons as you like, just by following that process. If you want to know how to remove an icon, you can use the pickup script. If you go back to the radar example and have a look at how the pickup script has an on collision that removes the object from the world as well as taking it out of the radar list. It's exactly the same process that you can apply here to remove objects from your map. Right, well, that's pretty much it. It's been a very long tutorial, but there's a lot of things involved in here. I hope you learnt something and that this is useful for your own projects. And I'll talk to you next time.